So today we're going to talk a little bit about Git and GitHub. So we'll kind of focus more on the UI, and I'll show you some of the desktop type stuff as well. And then I guess before we get started, hello, my name is Rebecca. So I'm the Director of Open Source and APIs at Rubrik. So this is very much a focus of mine and what I do every single day. I woke up this morning and I had about 40 notifications from GitHub of code to review and labels to assign and comments to address. So this is definitely something that I use every single day of my life. So to get started, who in here uses Git and GitHub today? A little bit. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of this. Follow-up question. Who in here is writing any kind of scripts or automating anything? Okay, so I see a lot more hands here. Why are you not using version control? Do you hate yourselves? You must be much better than I am, because I tend to write a script and then make a change and then break everything. And of course, I don't have 4 or 5 copies of it. So I think that's where version control is very beneficial, because you can go back and see the history of commits or changes that you've made, and you can revert back to different points in time if you, like me, screw something up. Right? So that's very beneficial. But what it also really allows, and the beauty of when you look at distributed version control, is that it allows multiple people to collaborate on something at one time. Right? So this is something that we actively use on the engineering side of the company that I work for. And so what we'll do is we'll have a new product release coming up. Right? And so then you'll have, for example, the version 5.0 main repository. But then you'll have 4 or 5 or 100 different branches, right, which we're going to get into in a second of what that is, of different people working on different features and functions at one time, right? And then we'll go back and merge them, and that's what will effectively build out a release in the future. So what is Git? So Git is that underlying mechanism that is allowing for version control, and I think the fun fact about Git is who created it, right? So this is definitely something that is widely used and created by somebody who's far smarter than I am. And when you look at version control mechanisms, there's a lot of people who use Git solely, right? It's a command line utility. You can absolutely use that. But a lot of companies like GitHub, right, or if you look at like Atlassian, they have a Bitbucket. That's a very popular version control system. You have a UI that's also available to you, right? And that's where GitHub really shines. And it also allows for easier collaboration, right? More social kind of commentary back and forth as you are working on a project, rather than just using the underlying command line mechanisms. So first thing, you want to get started. Well, how do you get started? Well, you create a project. And these projects are housed in repositories. And repositories don't just contain code. They can really contain whatever you want, to be honest. One of my coworkers, every presentation that he does, he puts in GitHub. So he's got a repository just filled with PowerPoints, right? You can put pictures in there. You can have code. But you also want to have documentation. So when I create a repository that's going to house this project and all of its components, it's more than just code, right? By default, you can choose to create a README file. Very important. I will go and consume other projects, and their README is either out of date or non-existent. That's a great place for you to aggregate all of that information and point to documentation, to quick starts, to images that will help your users or the consumers of that project get started more easily. Right? So I always strongly urge you to keep README files up to date. Codes of conduct, especially if you plan on collaborating with others, the goal is that you never need to enforce a code of conduct, but it's always there to cover, right, yourself just in case. And then, of course, documentation and licensing. It seems a bit trivial on the licensing front, but when you, again, start opening up these projects that you're working on and scripts that you're working on with other people, you, again, want to protect yourself and that person as well, right? So one of the licenses that we use very often is MIT licensing, which says, you can contribute freely, we own the base level project, and you get all credit for all contributions, right? So it's a very kind of happy medium in terms of licensing. And then again, focusing a bit on the vocabulary, commits. Every change that you make, every single time you hit save, effectively, you're creating a commit, right? So whenever we get to some of the advanced concept or more advanced concepts a little bit later on, what you're effectively doing is aggregating a set of commits to merge, right? So let's look at some common operations that you use with Git and GitHub. So the first one is issues. And I'm going to say kind of personally, I hate the word issue because it sounds a bit negative. But issues are often quite positive, right? So for example, a very common thing that you'll see in issues is just a question. Somebody will go, I'm not really sure about this. And they can just simply file an issue, pose a question, I'll get alerted on my repository, and then I can go and have that conversation with that user. Secondly, enhancement requests. You might notice that some project that you're working on may not have compatibility for your operating system or for some piece of software that you want to integrate it with. You can simply put in an issue and say, hey, this functionality is missing, I'd like it. That actually helps. That helps tremendously. Because what I find on the open source projects that I work on is that it takes one person. One person will go, hey, I noticed that you're missing this function. And then 50 more people will go, yes, I want that too. So it always takes that first person, and that helps companies like me or open source maintainers like me who are maintaining projects that you're using prioritize things to develop, right? It helps me build out the roadmap for my particular project that I'm working on. And then third, one of the other main uses of an issue is an issue, right? A bug report. This isn't working the way that it's supposed to work. Help, right? And at that point, it might be user error. It might be something wrong with my code. Either way, let's work on this together, right? Let's troubleshoot it and fix it. For people who don't always know how to get started, right? Because I tend, when people are using projects off of GitHub, I find that often they will be the consumer for a very long period of time. And then at a certain point, there's that moment where you go, oh my gosh, Rebecca's never going to get to this feature. I really want it. I'm just going to add it myself, right? Or I want to maybe learn a little bit more about GitHub and Git Flow, and I don't know where to get started. And so you'll see things like issues get assigned labels. And one of the very most common and easy to identify labels is first timer. And these are what we consider kind of easier contributions that we leave. We leave these issues open for a period of time to help you grab something, work on it, and contribute back. Oftentimes, these will be things like documentation. There's a typo. Well, I can go fix that in 5 seconds, and eventually I will. Usually for me, the general rule of thumb is 30 to 60 days. If it's sat there for 30 days and no one's grabbed that issue and worked on it, I'll do it. But if you're not very comfortable with using things like forks and pull requests and merging things back in, that's a great way to get started. Just fix a typo, right? Same thing with very simple functions to be added to projects in terms of writing the code. We'll tend to leave those for about 30, 60 days before we start working on them to give other people the opportunity to take that and begin working, right? To practice that flow and to practice contributing. Branching. All right, so I alluded to this earlier. The next step is you go, I want to get started on a project. Well, if you have access to a repository, if you're collaborating with other people, then you're going to create a branch. By default, every repository has at least one branch, and it's called master. Think of master as that known good state. This is generally if you're using released functionality and actually packaging things and saying this is 1.0, 1.1, it's based off of the master branch. Okay? And a very common practice is that somebody will generally create a second branch called something like development. Okay? And then off of the development branch, which is just a copy of master, we'll tend to create additional branches. So I might create a branch called, Rebecca, whatever the name of the feature is. And then a mod might create a branch and name it whatever that quickly identifies that it's his branch that he's working on and the feature that he's working on. That way we can work in parallel. And then generally we don't merge directly into master for very big projects. We'll tend to merge into development, run a bunch of tests, verify the code, and then once we feel very comfortable, then we will merge those changes into the master and develop a new release. So to create a branch, I created a little GIF. Instead of demoing this one, I'm going to show you a demo in a minute. But you'll simply go to that project. You'll see where their branches are on the left-hand side, and you'll simply drop down and switch to a branch if it's already created. And if there isn't one, you'll simply type your name or type whatever you want to call it and hit enter. It will create a new branch. It'll copy that master, and it will switch branches So now you are on your branch that you are working on, right, that copy that you can edit, and you can make whatever commits or changes that you want. However, this is all predicated on the idea that you have access to that repository. I often will work on projects that I don't have access to, right? So for example, my website that I actually run it out of GitHub. And I saw somebody else's template and I went, wow, that's really amazing. I like that, but I want to change 50 things. Well, I don't have right access to the repository. So if I tried to create a branch, it would not let me. Okay? So we're going to building to an idea in a second, which is called a fork. What a fork allows you to do is copy that entire repository into your account, right? Which is the very common thing that you do as an outside contributor, right? So if you are not kind of an active core maintainer on a project and have that right access where you can create the branch directly in the repository, what you'll do is you'll fork it, right? So that'll copy the entire repo to your account, and now you can make whatever changes you want, and it's local to you and your account, okay? So again, this is where sometimes, I'll be honest, I get a little bit lazy, and I'll start making edits to the master, and I'll break things, right? Inevitably, the second I'm like, it's fine, it's a small change, I'm gonna break it. So I still always recommend, even if you're working off of your own forked copy or your own repository, create a branch, okay? And then let's say I've made some change, I've edited it, I've fixed a typo, or I've added a new function, and I want to give that back. I want to contribute that back upstream to the main repository. The way that you do that is you create something called a pull request. And what that will allow me to do as the maintainer of the project is review it, make some changes as needed, have that conversation with you, and then if I like your changes, I shouldn't say like, if the changes are correct, if they work, if everything's been tested, then I'm going to pull them in, right? So I'm going to approve the pull request. I'm now going to pull those changes in, and now you've contributed, right? Now you've contributed to the project. It has now been modified based off of what you've recommended via this pull request, via your changes. And then this is the magic button that you get to see. If you are the maintainer, if you're the person on the other side who's going, yes, approved, is the button that says merge. And it's going to take all of those commits, like I mentioned, and it's going to merge them into whatever branch I choose. So at this point in time, if I have a development branch, I might choose to pull your changes into my development branch for further testing before I merge it into my master, okay? I will say if you have any kind of CI or automated testing set up, you may not be able to press this button quite yet. So for example, I have it set up in some of my, I'm a little bit security conscious, we'll say, where I have not only a set of tests that are automated, so if it fails one test, this button will be red. And I have to manually override it to approve your changes without the tests passing. But then secondly, one of the things that I do is I require signed commits, where you're using your digital signature, your CA signature from your computer to verify your identity before I will merge those in. That's again being extra cautious, but that's definitely something that's a common practice. Now everything I've showed you so far is using the web UI. But I like to work offline, right? I like to work on the train when I'm commuting into work. I like to work on planes. So I definitely want to have that offline copy of my repositories. That way I can do work, right? And so that's what's called a local repository. So what you'll do is called a clone. And so you'll clone that repository from the remote being that distributed version control system, in this case GitHub, and I'll make a copy of it down to my local laptop. And that is my local repository. So now I can absolutely make changes as much as I want on my local laptop, and then I'll be able to sync my two repositories. So there's a couple different functions. Right? First thing is clone. If you are more of a command line type person, you can absolutely use Git directly without using GitHub and GitHub Desktop. And so you'll simply go and do git clone via command line and then copy that URL. Right? Specify that. It will clone it down to wherever you specify on your local laptop. If you like to cheat and use the UI In this case, you can absolutely just hit Open in Desktop. And it will go ahead and do that clone for you automatically, and it will open it in GitHub Desktop if you have that installed. And then from there, you're going to be able to do things like create a branch and so on. But what if somebody else is making changes upstream, right? Because I'm collaborating with somebody else. That can absolutely happen. So in that case, what I can do is a fetch. And that will pull all of those changes back down from my remote repository into my local, so that way I can see what's been updated while I was offline. And likewise, once I have saved my changes, right, I've made my commits, I can go ahead and I can push those from my local repository back up to the remote one. That way we maintain any, having it synced across all. And the other very nice thing is there might be conflicts, right? What if I change line 8 and then a mod changes line 8, right? It will highlight any conflicts for you and allow you to go through and resolve it, which is the correct version, right? And it might be that, oh, actually I just need to bump it down to line 9, or it could be, ooh, I typoed it, a mod's right. Okay, I'm going to demo this for you in just a second, but before I do, let's review the quick high-level flow, okay? So if we talk about working on a project together, what it's going to look like is, first thing is, I'm going to create a branch if I have permissions. But if I don't have permissions, then what I'm going to first do is I'm going to fork it. I'm going to copy it over to my account, and then I'm going to create a branch. From there, once I have that branch, I'm going to make all the commits I want. Now, as a matter of best practice, which is a word or a phrase that I tend to hate, but when you think about best practice, it's actually better for you to have a ton of small commits rather than 1 or 2 huge commits. Because as a code reviewer, what it looks like to me is everything that's been added is highlighted in green, and everything that's been removed is highlighted in red, and it shows me file by file. However, if you go through and you do one huge commit where you modified 50 files and everything in the file, when I look at it now, it's going to say, you changed everything, everything's green, everything's red. And it's going to be really hard for me to do a proper review. Right? So it's going to take me longer to review, it's going to take me longer to merge, and you're going to be going, oh, hurry up, all right, I want these changes. So we generally recommend change one file at a time, right? Commit, 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 commit as you go. And the same thing, do 4, 5, 10, 20 lines, commit, right? Don't do everything at once, which I'm guilty of doing, right? And then once you have it at a state where you go, this is good, it looks great, I want to merge this back in, then you'll do a pull request, right? And generally there's a template that provides you an outline of the information that the maintainer is looking for to do a proper review, to do a proper test, right? It'll say, well, what did you change? Why did you change it, right? Where, right? Where has this been tested against? What operating system were you using for development? Some basic questions, okay? And then you'll do that merge, that pull request. I'll get notified as a maintainer, and I'll do a review. I might have questions for you. It's very normal. For example, where I work and in the projects that I work on, I prefer to use test-driven development. So for example, if I'm writing out a software development kit, and that's what I'm building, so for example, a module for PowerShell, one of the things that we do is we actually write the test first. So we'll write a unit test first, and then we'll actually write the function. So we'll say, what is the intended outcome? What should this look like? What error or code, HTTP response back should I get from the API? I build that out, and then I actually write the PowerShell function. Now, that's great. It's my job. So I can dedicate 40 hours a week to doing that or more. But as an outside contributor, especially somebody who's just now getting started, you might go, I think I know how to write a PowerShell function, so I'm going to write that. And then you submit a pull request, and it has no unit test, right? To be honest, I'm going to flag it. I'm going to go, hey, there's no unit test. We used, test-driven development, right? And we're going to start having that conversation. We recently just went through this, where I had somebody do a pull request and write a bunch of functions and add and try to merge that into a master for actually my PowerShell SDK that I'm working on. And I went through and I reviewed it, and I said, hey, there's no unit tests. Is that something that I can help you with? And the person literally went, please. I know how to write a function. I've never written a unit test in my life, right? And so it's absolutely going to be that conversation that's going to happen during that pull request. I might write a test or two and then show you how to write a test or two, and then we'll get all those tests written before we merge. But that's because we're using test-driven development, right? That's one example, but there tends to be a long set of conversation happening around before we go through and say, magic, approve, deploy, right? And then that's where we'll have all the CI go through and actually do all of the automated testing to verify. And then once I get the green light from all of my test suites, then I'll say merged. And I'll go ahead and merge that into master. And for some of the more baked out projects, what will happen from there is it'll go into a release automation cycle, right? Well, it will, if we use the PowerShell SDK as the example, it will then go and like publish it to PowerShell Gallery, right? It'll version it new, and we'll go through a bunch of additional steps at that deployment and at that merge. But those are talking really, really huge, big projects. If you're looking at just a repository of PowerShell scripts, what's probably going to happen is you're going to manually review, be happy, merge is going to happen, okay? Now, I'm going to show you what the heck I'm talking about, right? Let's visualize this. So I actually have right now 2 different GitHub accounts pulled up, okay? So that way I can show you from the outside perspective. So at my company, we have this, if you will, sort of service account called Roxy. So Roxy actually is our service account for all of our CI tests, but also any kind of educational material that we build out and we want to share with our community, we do that through Roxy. So in this case, we actually have built out a repository called Hello World. For those of our users who go, great, I've been consuming your SDK for years, but I actually don't really know how to contribute back, right? So with Hello World, if we click on that, so I'm logged in as Roxy right now, so I can approve my merge in just a second. We have, the actual instructions in the README file that will walk you through step by step. So this is something that after this session, if you wanted to go through it and practice it on your own, you're absolutely free to do, right? You'll simply go through and you'll fork it, and it walks you through this. So the first thing that we ask you to do is file an issue, right? Tell me what's missing, and then you'll go through and add it. So the theme of this, if you will, is actually nothing code related, because that tends to scare people off for their very first commits and their very first pull requests. So what we're actually building right here with our community is a list of travel recommendations, right? So we're actually building a list of travel recommendations. And so right now, if I go and I look in the Europe folder, and I go to the Milan markdown file, which is just a text file, we have some very nice information that I copied and pasted from Wikipedia. I will not lie to you. And then we have a section for things to do, things to see, drink, eat, and it's pretty empty. I don't like that, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go and do an issue, but I'm going to switch to my personal account, okay? So now I'm logged in over here. You can see some of the stuff that I'm working on. So now I'm going to go to Roxy at Rubrik, Hello World repository. I noticed already by looking at it that something's missing, so I'm going to file an issue. I'm going to call it, should we call it a feature request or a bug? I'm going to call it a bug here. It's broken. We don't have anything to do in Milan. That's wrong. I'm going to say, I promise I can type very well unless somebody's watching me. So in this case, we have a template, so it tells you some of the things that we would like you to input, right? Now in this case, obviously a lot of it's not applicable, right? I'm not going to add a screenshot, things like that. So I'm just simply going to say, there are no restaurant recommendations. And if you really are the emoji type of person, you can absolutely use all the emojis you want here. So I'm going to go thumbs down, lame. And then I'm going to submit a new issue. Now, if I popped over to my email right now, I'm going to get an email that says, hey, Rebecca as a user just filed an issue on this project. Okay? And then again, as the maintainer, I'm going to go through and be able to label it, assign somebody to work on it, and things like that. We've automated that as a part of this repository. So notice that in this case, Roxy already got assigned to work this issue, and it has a label, right? And in this case, our label is good first issue. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this. I said, you know what? I'm just going to change it. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to fork it. And I'm going to fork it to my account, so that way all my coworkers don't get mad. It's just going to make a copy of it. It takes about a second or two. and then now I have a forked copy. So notice it says Rebecca, right, my account name, and then hello world, and then underneath that you can see where it is forked from, so you can go back and look at the source. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to make a modification myself. So I'm going to go to Europe, go to Milan. Wait a minute. I'm about to show you a bad practice and nobody said anything. I'm on the master branch. Let's not do that. So let's go through and say rfits edits. So let's create a branch. I can't believe you were all going to let me do some terrible practice right here in front of you while they're recording and everything. Then my boss will see this and he'll be like, Rebecca, come on. So now we've modified, right? We added a branch, we created it, it copied everything to that branch, and then it automatically switched me. So now over in the top left-hand corner, you can see that I'm on the newly created branch. Now I'm going to go through here and I'm going to edit it. I had a lovely dinner last night. I'd go back. I'm going to go ahead and add what it was called. I copied and pasted it because you do not want to see me try and type it, right? So I feel confident. I feel like other people might enjoy that same restaurant. So I'm going to add that as my recommendation. If I want to link it, anything like that, I can just use Markdown, right? So Markdown is the type of text editing. And then at this point, I'm going to I'm going to commit that to my branch that I feel very comfortable committing that to. And now I want to do a pull request, right? So in this case, I have a bunch of options, right? Over on the left-hand side, it shows me what base repository. So in this case, I'm choosing the Roxy at Rubrik. Hello world, master, okay? At this point, if I wanted to, I could actually just merge this into my master and then do a pull request from there. But I like using branches. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, from the Rebecca copy in this branch, I want to merge it over to the main account and its master, right? So again here, one of the things that it'll link to automatically on the side is a contributing file. So typically, big projects will have a contributing guidelines of making sure things are formatted correctly, making sure you're adhering to codes of conduct and so on, right? Make sure that you understand licensing, things like that. And again, we have a template that I can fill out. But in this case, this is a pretty simple one, so I'm just going to say, I need food. And I'm in Milan, right? And I'm going to create a pull request. Cool. So now, in this case, it's looking for conflicts. If I had any tests that were built in and automated, it would run through those. And that's all that I would do here as the end user. Now, if we flip back over to the Roxy account that I'm logged into, notice that I can see an issue. And I also see this pull request getting created. So now as the maintainer, I'm typically going to go in here. I'm going to add who the reviewer should be. So in this case, I'm going to assign myself. If this might be a bigger, long project, then I'm going to go through and assign labels, like this is documentation, or this is a P0, or whatever. And then I'm going to validate it. So in this case, I can go and look and see how many commits there are. In this case, 1. And I can see how many files have been changed. So remember what I was telling you about the subtraction and the addition? I can see very clearly what was changed. And I feel comfortable as the maintainer that this is adding value, that this is going to work and people are going to like this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say approved. Now in this case, I might comment and start having that conversation. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to merge it, okay? But one of the things that I prefer to do is I always want to link, if there's a pull request tied to an issue, I want to link them together, okay? So in this case, I believe it was issue number 51. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make that link, and I'm going to comment that, and then I'm going to merge. And I'm going to confirm that merge. So if I pop back over to the issues, I will actually see that I referenced it in a pull request, and then I can now see that by correlation here, it has been addressed, and I feel very comfortable. I can go ahead and close this issue as the maintainer or as the user. Okay. Now, in this case, we're kind of done, right? I've made a contribution, I forked it over, I've done the pull request, everything looks good. So the last thing that I want to show you, because I know we're running close on time, is that everything that I just demonstrated to you can be done offline, right? I don't have to be online. So You can absolutely do this via command line, or you can use something like GitHub Desktop. So notice that I have already gone ahead and cloned this locally to my laptop. And if I want to, I can make the changes right here. So I can say show in Finder, show me that repo, right? I can go into, let's say, Amsterdam, open that up. It's a markdown file, and I can use whatever code editor I want, like something like Atom from GitHub that they've released, or something like VS Code. And I can make whatever change I want, right? And then go through that same step where I'll save the changes, do a push, and then open a pull request, okay? So I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions? All right, so we're all gonna go start contributing to open source projects tonight? Yes? All right, if you wanna walk through this process on your own, if this is something that's unfamiliar to you, like I mentioned, you can go to the Roxy at Rubrik account, and there is a repository called Hello World, and it will walk you step by step through all of these procedures, and that way you can get more comfortable, and you can provide me more recommendations in Milan as well for my next trip, right? All right, thank you very much. Okay. We've got more time for questions, apparently. So if you have any questions, feel free to yell them at me or come up here and ask them.
So you mentioned that you were running your own site on GitHub.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you went from WordPress to this, right?
You can migrate. And I will say that I started migrating and I went, insert a lot of bad words. And I went, I'm building from scratch. So what I ended up doing was exporting all of my blog posts and then converting them into Markdown and then uploading them into a completely new site is how I did it. And you can go through and append date timestamps to show that they're not brand new. So that's the process I took, because what I experienced was that WordPress is a bit not extensible is the word that I'll use there. They're not friendly when it comes to integrating or migrating out of it.
What's the experience like after you migrated? Because WordPress is pretty simple,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's the experience like once you migrate?
Sure. So if I just pop over to my account, like what you can see if I go to my repositories, you can see that it's called rfitzhugh.github.io, right? So this is just the GitHub internal name for it based off of my user ID, right? And what I've done is I've purchased a domain. So you can actually come in here and see, like, there's a very simple file called cname, and it actually holds the URL that I've purchased, right? So what's going to happen is when you go to RebeccaFitzhugh.com, it's going to redirect to this. It's going to be transparent to the end user, and I like it because, again, I have total control over everything. If I want to move this button over here, as long as I know CSS or HTML or whatever language I'm using, I can do that. If I want to change the color palette, I can do it. And you have a lot more, I think, just configurable options if you're building it and hosting it yourself. And I feel like I'm like now working for GitHub with the next statement I'm going to say. It's free. So I don't have to pay the $250 a year anymore. I can just do it for free and publish it. And I just all I need to do is buy the domain name, right? In this case, and redirect. And if you don't want to buy the domain name and redirect, you don't have to. I could absolutely go to rfitzhugh.github.io, and the website's there. And the other thing that I'll point out, and it's all in Markdown in terms of the blog posts. And Markdown's actually, the first time you look at it, you're like, what am I looking at? This like alien language with all of these extra brackets and asterisks and things like that. But once you get to use it, it's actually really easy and intuitive, but it takes a little bit. So I'll warn you there. And the other thing that I really like about using like GitHub particularly, because we use Bitbucket internally for a lot of our code for our actual software. And then we use GitHub for all of our open source stuff. And you can create, like we have a collection of Markdown files, right? These text files that explain what every single function does. And then we use something called Gitbook. And again, this is a free utility from GitHub, and it aggregates it, and it builds it out into like really, really nice looking documentation. Like I'll show you just our PowerShell one. So we've linked to it in our README file. So you can just simply go right here, voila. On the back end, this is just a bunch of handwritten Markdown files, and it looks really nice and aggregates it. And again, this is customizable too, so if I wanted to change the colors, things like that, and it's free. So there's a lot you can do, version control and coding and things like that that are actually not major projects. Like documentation, I can have it aggregate. I can build a website really easily. And the other thing too is like there's a ton of templates that are out there for you. So if you literally go and look at like say my site and you go, I don't want to change a thing, you can literally just fork it and customize it, and now you have your own site, right? So there's a bunch of templates available to you.